Hello, welcome back to Grizzly Valley. There's quite a number of things I want to talk about before I get into this video properly, though first, of course, I want to say a little bit about what I'm actually going to do in this episode, which is some of the more filling in the park with rockwork and foliage, and also this queue over here. It's something which I think I really like to skip over, at least up to this point in time. Like, I like to skip from building to building and doing the more general and the more unique parts of the park rather than the laying out of the park, adding foliage or rockwork, but I really have to do that at this point in time, and I'm gonna have to do it a little bit more in the future as well. So that's something which I wanted to do here just to make this area seem a little bit more finished and to also actually transition to what is going to be the majority of this video, which is adding some Roman houses to this area on the other side of this plaza to finish at least this part of the park. In terms of the buildings, hopefully, and then see where that goes really. But the majority of things that I want to talk about are mostly about this series itself. First, I really have to apologize for the incredible long time it took to get this video up here. I'm very busy at the moment, but I recorded a commentary earlier this week and accidentally rendered it in 71 kilobytes per second, and that is terrible audio quality. You don't want to hear that commentary, and that was pretty much lost. And then yesterday I recorded it again, but actually I faced the microphone the wrong way. Don't ask me how, I have no idea how I even did that, but yeah, there was quite some echo in that recording, so I'm doing this again, which does have the advantage that I actually know pretty well what I want to talk about and have actually got a good list of topics to burn through. But just so you know, that's why this video took a little bit longer than usual. I should at least not let my upload rate be this bad, and I definitely also want to spend a bit more time on making videos as well, because it's just a lot more fun than making essays and stuff. Well, I digress terribly. Anyway, there are also some things which I want to talk about which are more about the future videos. And first of all, I get so many questions still about whether I'll actually get POVs up for the roller coasters which I have at this point. And I still have to say I'm not gonna do that, at least not anytime soon. There's more of a personal reason for it, and also a very practical reason. My personal reason is that it sort of feels like as if I were a painter and would just show my painting unfinished and then leave it there, and then at some point in the future come back to it, and I just don't really want to spoil what the rides actually look like on ride before they're actually finished. Which is really just a personal preference, but that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to release POVs anytime soon, at least not until the coasters and the areas around them are completely finished. And another reason is that the frame rate is getting noticeably bad. I am actually running at around 10 to 12 FPS at this point in time, and the park is still far from finished, so I have no idea how bad it's going to be in the future. It's manageable in terms of recording since, well, I'm used to and actually worse frame rates in Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, so I'll be fine with that, and as long as I record in the time-lapse format, you know, the frame rate isn't going to be too big of an issue unless I really hit like 4 FPS, at which point it'll become unworkable anyway, so I'm not too worried about that, but it's one reason why I won't be showing off POVs, at least anytime soon. I'm not gonna ask anybody to record it for me yet, and it's definitely not something that I want to do in a video, but just so you know that that's a reason why I really can't get the POVs up and just focus on the time-lapses at this point in time. Now that said, I think I might also get an issue with the frame rate. Like I said, it's already quite a low frame rate, so I'm not entirely sure if I'll be able to finish this park exactly in the way I want. So this might also turn into the thing where I just sort of keep the park going until at a certain point it just decides to give up on my computer, or my computer gives up on the park rather, which is, I don't know how long that'll take, but that's probably what's going to be the end of this park at some point in the future, and at that point I'll just try to see and find some solution for that problem. So yeah, that's pretty much all about that stuff. Now about this here, I wanted to add a quick queue over here. I didn't want to add any buildings since the buildings already, and this I think is mostly due to the fact that all of the pieces which I really had to use are very light, but the buildings already have a very whitish color to them. There isn't too much different textures or colors within the building, so I was really afraid that if I would add buildings all around this coaster, like you would see on the Forum in Rome, it would quickly become a white sea of marble, and I wanted to change it up a little bit more than just that. and add some foliage instead to make the buildings which I do have come out a little bit more, and it's also maybe a bit easier to do and probably a bit more realistic for a theme, from a theme park standpoint anyway. Which, coming back to what I said in the last video, I actually got some comments about that as well, and I kind of like to reply to comments in videos since I don't always have time to reply to all of them, but I do see all of them, and there is still that big majority of people who do have questions but never really comment on videos, so just addressing that topic there. I do recognize that, of course, this is a game, and it's all about fantasy and completely fantasizing about what parks you could build in the game without having to worry about politics or licenses or money in that regard, or anything stupid like that, which you have to deal with in the real world. So I definitely like the fantasy aspect of it a lot, and being able to just fantasize whatever theme parks you would really love to see, but realistically don't really see in real life. But I want to keep a certain sense of realism, not to make it feel completely out of this world, like at least make the parks feel like they could be a real life park. So hence is why I don't want to completely make things 100% realistic and base it off real life parks. I definitely want to make it a bit of fantasy and really what I would love to see in a theme park, but you never really see in a theme park, but at least still keep some sense of realism to it. And when it comes to the foliage, by the way, this is something which I quickly wanted to say, but it's a bit late to talk about right now. I wanted to have some Mediterranean foliage over here by at least using the tropical trees mostly rather than the sycamore trees, but most of the Mediterranean theme is really coming from the cypresses, which generally, if you want to have a Mediterranean theme, might as well spam cypresses because that'll make it look Mediterranean at some point. I would have loved to actually use some more palm trees, because you do see some palm trees in that temperate sort of climate. Even if you don't see them that much and mostly in planters, they do work quite well for the theming. But at the moment, and I don't know if this will ever happen, but I don't think we have any convincingly Mediterranean palm trees, at least not the very, or at least, yeah, the very specific fan palm trees, or the very wide old ones, which I would love to really see. Anyway, this is where I wanted to add the buildings, and this is something which is probably gonna require a bit of explaining, because I had a pretty complicated situation over here. You'll notice that these are actually sort of collages of different time lapses, very much, and probably more so than the last videos. And it has everything to do with the fact that I was really just doing random stuff here without really preparing anything, and just sort of come up with things along the way. And the same really goes for the idea. I started off with a very Roman villa countryside type house, so really one of these filthy rich people's homes in the countryside with enormous galleries and large horizontal stretched out houses, which is something which I figured I wanted to do because it's so very typically Roman, but I ended up not going with it because it's a very boring facade to look at. It doesn't have many different parts with different textures and different shapes, but it's very straight and all in the same style, so decided to not go with that because it just kind of looked too boring. And instead then I tried to make it look more like a very poor cityscape with buildings in all sorts of different directions and shapes and textures, which is something that I decided to not go with in the end either, because it just sort of looked too random and too unorganized. So instead I ended up going for something which is sort of in between. I feel these houses are very much inspired, or really based on some reconstructions of houses in Pompeii, which have the detailing and at least some of the more rich details that the, really the Roman houses of the filthy rich had, but it doesn't really have the very boring, predictable straight lines and the same style and large galleries all over the place, which you had in the very large rural villas. And I am not too knowledgeable about Roman houses, but it's basically, I wanted to base these buildings on those two types because they look convincingly Roman, at least so I feel, and they're also at least dynamic enough to make this look like a fun facade rather than just one straight wall of boringness. And that said, these buildings aren't very much focused on composition or shape or anything like that. They were mostly just fun practice to see what you can do with different details. That's definitely been part of all of the buildings which I've made so far, but in this case it was mostly about seeing how you can use the different details to add different textures to walls. So for instance, using these signs to get these red cornices or these red base walls, and see how you can use different pieces to get some details onto walls. It's not so much about shapes, but really about getting these simple buildings done, and just experiment with the pieces to see what we can really do with it. And that was the main idea behind these buildings, other than, well, whatever, let's just see where these buildings are gonna go and just add random stuff. So yeah, that was really what sort of idea I went into these buildings with, and I think it really fits with the way I'm approaching the game at the moment, and have been really since episode 1, and something which I think Fluxtrons actually worded a lot better than I did when I first said it, which is basically that since we're just so early in alpha with this game at the moment, and we only have 2 themes and not too many objects yet, I think really the most fun and probably best way of playing the game, or approaching the game, at least for me, is to just see what we can actually do with the pieces at the moment, just experiment and get used to the system, and not really focus so much on making the best parks, because it's, for me at least, I think it's better to focus on what we can actually do with the pieces. And this very much also, from the standpoint of how I like to approach themes, this is something which I would like to talk about. I actually got some questions if I would actually talk about what I think of the future updates of the game, so maybe I can tie this into that. The way I like to approach themes is not as they're giving us certain themes, therefore we can build buildings of these certain themes. I'd rather look at the objects which come with the themes, or the general styles that come with the themes, rather than the very strict themes that they give us. One of the reasons for that is that there is just an infinite amount of themes that you can come up with, and different ways to even categorize those themes, and themes within those themes, really. For instance, the Efteling has a fairy tale theme, and Disney has a more story-based, franchise-based theme. Some parks base their themes on countries like PortAventura, like Europa Park, and some parks just have, I don't know what kind of themes, just do random stuff. Like there's, I think there's a theme park in Denmark with a dog poo roller coaster, just to give a weird example. So it really, there are too many themes to ever get a good amount of sets for, and I would rather just look at what objects we get. So, because for instance, we may not get a Main Street theme, which is something which people have actually speculated about and would love to get into the game, but maybe we might get at some point in the future a fantasy theme or a medieval theme, which comes with cornices that you'll be able to use to make main streets, or that comes with windows that look very much like the Main Street ones. And so I think it's better to look at the themes in a sort of pick and choose way of combining different pieces from different themes to get different themes going. Because in the end, there are just so many different themes and they all draw from each other that it's really, I think you're just limiting yourself too much by just saying, I've got this certain style and I must follow it and this is what the game gives me. Which is something that I think is kind of a pitfall if you're making anything in any simulation game. I think you shouldn't approach buildings like, we're given certain pieces, now what can we do with these pieces? But I think it's better to approach it like, I want to build certain buildings and let's see how we can use the pieces to actually make those buildings happen. Anyway, that's a pretty bad wording of it perhaps, but that's how I like to look at things, and that's also why I think I want to have this series for the very first pre-alpha, just to get used to the objects which we have at the moment, so that when we get future updates, I sort of have a sort of good understanding of what we can actually do with the current pieces, and by the time that we get new pieces, kind of know the old pieces enough to experiment with how you can use the newer pieces to combine them with the older pieces and make new stuff. Basically just get used to what we already have before we get new things, so you can sort of build on what we can already do with this. Like, with building some of these buildings, I actually found out that so many more things are possible than I initially thought, and I think this goes for really anyone. I don't think anybody really expected to get so many different themes to be possible with just the 2 themes which we have in the game right now. And I think that really helps to also make the future themes more feasible, even if we don't get them directly into the game, because you sort of know what works already, so you can add on that knowledge as soon as we get new pieces and new updates will come out, which I am really looking forward to, especially the fantasy theme. I'm really looking forward to. I actually really love the things which we've seen so far from it, and I think in general it's a very promising theme. It's probably going to be pretty versatile, at least that's my hopes on it, and quite different from the themes which we have at the moment. So I'm very quietly hoping that we'll get the fairy tale theme the 24th of May in the new updates. Though I don't know how many people know about this actually, but you can actually go into the game's files, and there are a couple of folders which contain some themes in them, which probably hint at future themes which we'll get into the game, and there is the fairy tale theme in there as well, obviously, but there's also a spooky theme, which is quite interesting. There aren't any Asian or Roman themes though, which is kind of a bummer. I kind of would have loved to see those at some point in the future, but I generally just want to wait and see what we'll get in future episodes and not speculate too much about it. Just kind of find out by the time that we get them released. Perhaps also most fun to do. Anyway, this was pretty much the point in building these buildings where I think I was like, oh well, whatever, never mind, we'll just see whatever this is gonna turn into, and I pretty much stepped off from the reference which I had. So this might not be the most realistic or best buildings ever, but I really just wanted to try all of the different pieces and see where you can put them into little nooks and make little details with them and stuff like that. So nothing really too serious at this point in this video, but really just messing with random stuff and see what you can do with them. It might not turn out to be too realistic in the end, but I really wanted to get a style which doesn't so much just look like Italian buildings or Roman buildings in general, but are really characteristically Roman. Like, I think it's very easy to make some Roman buildings that still look like some of the Italian buildings, at least in the general style that you see today. And I really wanted to make them in a sense that might not be entirely realistically Roman, and definitely not that common in Rome or any of the Roman cities, but look more characteristically Roman, like buildings that if you see them you just go, aha, this must be Rome, and not just modern day Italy, something like that. That's what I generally wanted to try with these buildings. And one mistake which I made though, which I'll definitely get back to in the future, and thank you so much for actually picking up on this because I feel very awkward about this, was the fact that I put those red flags on the temple building of the roller coaster, and as you might understand, having red flags on the pillars of classical buildings which are pretty large and horizontally laid out is a very awkward thing to do, and it isn't entirely a reference that I should have in a theme park. So I'll definitely remove those. I was having the general idea that it would be so cool to make these buildings look a little bit more colorful. This especially goes for the temples, because Roman temples are much more colorful, at least were much more colorful than they are today. Like, today they're just the stone and marble leftovers that we see, but they actually used to have all sorts of paintings and decorations, and they used to be a lot more colorful than they're usually depicted, which is something that I wish I could actually have in these buildings as well, and I at least wanted to add a bit more color and happiness to the buildings in general by adding the flags, but I'll need to find some other way because it's very inappropriate. But yeah, that's something which I tried to get in there. Probably won't be able to ever get in there because there aren't really any colored details over there yet, but it's something which I might return to in the future. Also, I really hope at some point in the future updates. I actually haven't read anything about this yet, which confirms it. There might well have been messages about this, so if anybody actually does know anything about this, it would be really awesome if you could let me know, because I would really love to know about this. I think recolorability is what we're really lacking at this point in the game, and I'm actually really curious to see when that'll get added into the game. Because though I have to say, it's so much more versatile than I ever expected without the recolorability at this point in time. Being able to recolor anything just makes options so much better. I know that coasters will be recolorable, but I don't know where the limits will be in terms of buildings. Like, whether certain pieces will be recolorable. Obviously, brick walls like these are pretty useless to have a recolorability for, but for certain walls like colored walls or some stucco walls, it would actually be really handy. Anyway, a couple of things I want to end this video with is that I want to talk a bit about the future of this series. In the next episode, I actually will jump from this Roman section and leave it sort of unfinished, and the same goes for the Japanese area, to work on the main streets, which is quite a big thing because I think the expectations for it are pretty high. But I want to make a main street which is quite different from the main street which I had before, which I'll explain quite a lot more in the next video, obviously. But the last main street was very American, very much based on the Disney main streets, very straight, not just in the buildings but also very much in the layout. And I would love to make this main street a little bit more European, with more curvy roads and more European architectural styles, at least inspired by buildings in Barcelona and Paris, and sort of move from that general style. But yeah, that's basically what I want to do in those future episodes. Beyond that though, I really have no idea. I haven't really been able to record too many episodes lately, so I only know that the future 2 episodes are going to be about the main streets, and from that point onward I really don't have a clue. I will pretty much probably jump a little bit more randomly between sections of the parks, and episodes probably won't be as coherent and about one certain thing, because truth be told, I just sort of like to work on whatever I feel like working rather than following any sort of schedule or plans to build certain things at certain points in time. So I'll probably just jump from any part of the park to another part of the park and make the park come together in general. That's what I think is going to be the most important thing to do in future episodes. Whether it'll be more interesting or more boring than adding these buildings and making the general areas, I'm not quite sure, but it's something which I'll really have to do in future episodes, and what some of them will definitely be about. More laying out of the park, adding some smaller areas, flat rides, rockwork and foliage. Anyway, that's it for this episode. So thank you guys for watching, and see you guys next time, in which I'll actually start working on the most important and defining building of the main street, really. So bye bye.